I'm Stella Garber, co-founder of Hoop, a startup that's focused on helping people easily organize and do their best work. I am talking to leaders in tech on how they manage all the things in today's hyper-connected, distraction-prone, and just kind of crazy world and find the focus. What are the frameworks that people are using, and boundaries that they've drawn? What tools are they using to stay on track? And how do they structure their days? Today, we're talking to my friend, Sean Johnson, an investor with many successful exits, a Kellogg professor, a serial entrepreneur and founder, and he's got a new company called Madison, which is marketing professional services firms like consultants, accountants, attorneys, and agencies, and helping them grow into trusted advisors. Sean, welcome. Could you introduce yourself in your own words, please?
Wow. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this with you. And a lot of the themes that you all talk about, I think as we'll kind of get into overlap with kind of how I try to approach aspects of my life. So, yeah, so super short version. For 12 years, I was a partner at a firm called Manifold. It was a venture holding company. So it was sort of this weird, we had an advisory business. It started off working with startups. It moved upstream to work with enterprise eventually. And it was sort of like innovation consulting, but it would be like with the intent to actually build and go to market with stuff and, kind of compete against startups and that kind of thing. So got to build a lot of cool products for our clients there. We had a venture investing arm, as you mentioned. I think we did around 25 or so investments during my time there. We had a couple of exits, a bunch of dumpster fires like everybody. And so I did that for 12 years. And I taught at Kellogg, taught digital marketing as well during that time. In 2022, I told my partners for a variety of reasons that I wanted to step away from the business. Took a little more than a year off, which was interesting and challenging in some ways, psychologically, emotionally, all that kind of thing. Did a lot of thought work around my identity and what I want. And I kind of started testing ideas, kind of using like the lean startup customer development playbook, starting around like the middle of 2023. And the first ones were duds. And then the third one, had some legs to it. It ended up being a services business, which was surprising to me. It would not have been what I would have expected. But going through the thought process and taking the time to kind of figure out what I actually wanted, that was where I arrived. And we can talk about it later, but there are parts of me that there is a tension, there. But I know I'm doing it for the right reasons, and I actually really enjoy the work. And so, and I'm solving a pain point that I think a lot of boutique professional service firms have, and
Mm-hmm.
and so it has this feeling of having a tailwind behind it, in the sense of like every time I get on a call with one of them, they're like, "Oh, I get it," and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we totally need. And then it's a question of whether they have budget or whatever, but nobody does not understand it, and no, and it is. It's not necessarily like the hair on fire problem that you talk about kind of in startup land, but it is definitely a problem, and they all seem to
Mm-hmm.
have it. So here we are. So that's what I'm doing. That's the next, phase of my professional life, at least.
So a few weeks ago, you published this really amazing, insightful essay full of vulnerability, which I love, called What I'm Doing Next, which I'll share, where you sort of talk through that year that you took off and how you got to, figuring out what was next. How did it
Yeah.
feel to step away from so much of what you knew and sort of into the unknown?
Hard, very hard. I mean, I didn't step away with a plan, and I didn't step away to go do something new. I, I talk about it in the thing, but I mean, it was a function of two things. One, we were talking about where we wanted to go with the firm over the next 10 years, and I realized that I didn't, I didn't care about the things that we all kind of cared about that I thought I did, and a younger version of me did. And so, and there's nothing wrong with any of it. but like it's similar stuff. Like they wanted to keep growing. They wanted to have, a company of a certain size and do all of these kinds of things. And it just wasn't resonating with me the way that I maybe a younger me it would have. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and I think maybe part of that was I had started to deal with some anxiety stuff. And I think in hindsight, I realized I was dealing with anxiety stuff for a really long time and I was just sort of burying it. But, part of the premise of the fund was that we get much more involved in the companies and try to be as helpful as we possibly can. And it was sort of like a version of like the platform kind of strategy that you
Mm-hmm.
see other funds doing. And we did it because we had we had an advisory business that could pay for all this talent that we could then kind of take our 20% time or whatever and allocate it to helping the fund companies. But what that meant for me, and I don't know what else to compare it to. Like I don't know how other funds think or how people in other funds think, but um, like I said, 70% or so of your portfolio is going through some kind of crisis at any given time. And it's a lot to emotionally take
Mm-hmm.
on top of our 70-person firm and all of the issues that we're dealing with that. And so I think I realized like it was, and, I think in some ways, like my partners have greater capacity to deal with
Mm-hmm.
some of that stuff than I did. Maybe not. Maybe they'll have a similar kind of situation in the future. But um,
Mm-hmm.
it was becoming too much,
Yeah.
and I'd realized that like if I go down what we're talking if I do what we're talking about doing for the next 10 years, I don't know what the cost will be in terms of like my family, in terms of my physical health. And again, I think there are other people. I know lots of people that um, you're in PE or, you have progressively larger funds or you do like the personal holding company thing and you've just got like your
Yeah.
hands in all of these different pies. Um, I think it was just sort of a realization that my capacity to do all of that um, isn't what maybe I thought it was, and the potential risks that it would present to me
Mm-hmm.
myself, not speaking for anybody else, was just too great. And so yeah, so I stepped away, but it was really hard. I mean, it was um, lots of issues like identity stuff, my ego, my pride. When you are, especially when you're a partner at a fund, everybody wants to talk to you, and
Yeah.
you get hit up on LinkedIn all the time, and people want to raise money from you or get advice from you or whatever, and you're just sort of like quote unquote important. And I realize, like, I know I say that somewhat tongue in cheek because I do know, like, there's a massive percentage of the world and even a massive percent of the startup community that's never heard of Manifold. Like I wasn't
Yeah.
actually a big deal, but you feel like you're kind of a big deal.
Oh, for
And
sure.
you have this feedback loop that tells you that you're a
Yeah.
big deal. And
And
so, um,
everybody, everybody aspires in some, or not everybody, but in a lot of the tech world, there's this aspiration to do
yeah,
exactly the job that you had. Yeah.
right.
I feel like,
Right.
I don't know,
And
I feel
so,
like you're,
yeah,
I was just gonna say, I feel like you're talking about it kind of negatively, but it takes so much self-awareness to do what you did. And I feel like a lot of times people reach this point in their careers where they're sort of doing the dream job and they
yeah,
realize that, their health isn't great and their relationships aren't
mm,
great, but then they don't really do anything about it and then it goes into like a crisis mode. Or I feel like I've definitely
mm.
had this conversation with people in private, but it takes so much self awareness and really like, I don't even know, like strength to be able to talk about it so publicly. So I think that's so
Well, it took a long
admirable.
time to it took a long time to get there, and it didn't feel um, it didn't feel strong or brave or anything like that at the time. I think it felt like
Hmm.
self-preservation in a way,
Yeah.
and it like things did lots of stuff, like the therapy and things like that to kind of work through it. But like
Hmm.
it did feel weird. It happened at a kind of an important time in our family too, because my wife, she was a managing director of transfer pricing at a consulting firm, and
Hmm.
she was feeling some disillusionment with her job and wanted a change. And through a variety of kind of serendipitous events, um, got offered a job to become a chief revenue officer at a different consulting firm and an investment bank.
Mhm.
And so it
Mhm.
was a huge opportunity for her. And she jumped on this like the closest thing I've seen to a rocket ship that's not a startup. Like they got bought by Odex pretty soon after, and they just have these crazy ambitions to grow. And she is
Mhm.
a key person in making that happen. And so like it's been really fun to watch her kind of grow and stretch in real time. I think in
Mhm.
hindsight, like if I were trying to continue my own rocket ship at the same time that she was
Mhm.
going to do this, like I think something would have been very problematic there. So the timing was good, but like I found myself, especially like in the early days, thinking about um, sitting down with her boss at dinner and him turning to me and being like, "What do you do?" And a year ago, having like a really good answer to that, and like I just because I admire him, I think he's every story I've heard about this guy, he just seems like a great business person, but like a great man,
Mhm.
and so there was a part of me that was like, I belong in the room. You know, like I say, I'm a
Mhm.
GP at a fund and I'm a professor at Kellogg. Like I
Mhm.
belong in this
Mhm.
room. We're not the same, but like I belong. And
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
like a year ago or whatever, it was like, well, you know, I have, I have this little coaching group thingy, and I spend some time in solitude, and I make dinner, and you know, like it just, I don't know. It didn't feel brave. It felt very uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I realized that I was I thought that I didn't associate my identity with my work.
Yeah.
Cause I used to advise our founders all the time, like, don't do that.
Yeah. No,
It's a
it's
trap.
very, yeah,
But I did way more than I thought I did. I
totally.
100% did. So,
You said in your post, this line I loved, people don't get joy from accomplishing goals. You get joy from setting the goal and then by noting your progress towards the goal. Can
yeah.
you reflect on some things in your professional career when you were getting joy in the pursuit and now sort of day to day, what are the sort of things that spark that joy for you?
Yeah. I mean, so part of this came from, I've had to reorient how I think about goals over my career. So when I was 22, when I got graduated college, I wrote down a list of like 10 things I wanted to do in my career. And in
Hmm.
hindsight, a lot of them were really small, but at the time they seemed huge. Um, you know, like have a company that hits $1 million in revenue. Like that sounded like that is a big deal to a lot of people. And it still should be a big deal, but it's easier than you think. And so like, and it certainly is easier than my 22-year-old self thought. And so I started ticking these things off, and I realized at some point that it didn't feel the way that I thought it was going to feel. And that's a common thing that people talk
So
about, right?
common.
And so I had a period of time where I felt a malaise about it because it's like, well, what do? You just set bigger goals that you will also feel
Hmm.
unfulfilled by. Do
Hmm.
you not set goals at all? That doesn't seem to be the right thing. And so where I settled with the help of some wise mentors and reading about like how goal setting works and how it influences your brain and all that kind of stuff was um, I set goals as a way to give me a rudder toward my life and a
Hmm.
direction. I hold the goal loosely, like the achievement of the goal very loosely. And so it's
Hmm.
like I don't I I have revenue targets and things like that for my new thing. I have net worth targets. I have other kinds of goals that aren't work related or better tangible, but I kind of don't care if I hit the goal. It's sort of like it's a way for me to find direction. And then what it
Hmm.
does is it gives me forward momentum. When I read it, I get excited, and it grounds me and reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then I get to like note all of the little intermediate milestones sort of along the way. And I'll caveat this with like, I don't think I was very good at this. In fact, I posted about this today. Like I wasn't very good about this the first time around.
Hmm.
I had a note in my, because that was a thing I wrote down when I was 22. I was like, when we hit $1 million in revenue, like we're going to just throw a rager and it's going to be amazing. Cause like, big deal. And it was like 3 months after it happened that we even realized we did it. It didn't, we didn't celebrate. And so I don't think I did a good enough job the first time around of noting my progress toward
Yeah.
the goal. And so one
Well,
of the things I'm,
you said that you wrote it down. That seems like something that most people don't do. Was that something that you did as sort of an OKR or KPI in the business, or was it in your head, or how did you think about that?
It was something I would talk about with my partners about like, hey, I think
Hmm.
that like that just seems like a milestone that would be cool, really cool. And
Yeah.
so I think we should celebrate when we hit it. And we didn't. We didn't celebrate. So we were good about doing like our holiday party, but I think I wasn't very good about outside of that celebrating progress and milestones. And it's just as you know, I mean, like building a startup is so hard, building a business is so hard. And so if you don't bake opportunities for celebration, I think into the cadence of things, it's like,
Hmm.
what are you doing? And so like, I want
Yeah.
to be much better about that this time around.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I will say though, like when I stepped away, I think one of the other things I realized was like, I really enjoyed the early days. And so
Hmm.
I'm trying to cherish those much more like in real time. So like, I
Yeah.
remember when we opened up our first office and we had their like the logo on the door, like that was a big deal to me. When
Hmm.
we ordered, we didn't have enough money for like the conference room table, but we had enough room for the chairs. So we bought the chairs first and we took
Hmm.
the like cardboard boxes the chairs were in and we pushed them in the center and made like a makeshift table. Um, like just silly stuff. Like the first holiday party that we did. And it was like, we had one employee maybe, and we had our spouses and, we went
Hmm.
out to dinner or whatever. Like I just, I think I like the building and I like the early
Yeah.
days so I'm trying to be present for it much more than I was the first time around. And like not just be like, I want to build this big huge thing and I'm not going to be happy until I build this big huge thing and I'm going to be focused exclusively on building a big huge thing, but like actually be like, we got a client today. This is great,
Yeah.
or um yeah, all of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And then I think the last thing is I also realized that like I'm really happy when I'm doing the work. So
Hmm.
um anxiety goes away, other things I'm worried about go away. So like if I'm and I've gotten much more disciplined over the years around naming the most important thing I want to work on any given day,
Hmm.
trying to create the right conditions to kind of get into like flow state or whatever it is. Like when I'm doing the work,
Hmm.
I'm happy in general.
Yeah.
And it's like it could be very simple stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but I enjoy it. And so trying to maximize the odds that on any given day I'm able to get into a something resembling a flow state, working on
Hmm.
something that I know is important, and then not allowing myself to worry about the larger stuff because I've taken the time to reflect and I've taken the time to
Hmm.
plan, and now
Yeah.
today is not the time to evaluate my plan or to worry about my plan. It's time to just like
Hmm.
do the work,
To execute. Yeah.
So
That's really smart.
yeah.
You sort of remind me of at Atlassian. When I was at Atlassian, one of the co-founders, he had this expression. He would always say, "These are the good old days." And so my
Yeah,
co-founders and I,
that's so cool.
whenever we're like, oh my God, shit's hitting the fan, and we're like, well, these are the
Yeah,
good old days,
yeah, yeah.
because it's
I
so
love
true.
that.
Yeah, you like reflect back, and the journey it was all about the journey, as you said. Um,
I've heard that with people.
well,
Like, I don't have a journaling practice, but friends of mine who have a journaling practice, they say like they'll look back at their journal from 3 years ago. It's something that they
mhm.
were super stressed out about, and like
Yeah,
how silly it feels, and how they actually kind of remember that time fondly in a way. It's
totally.
interesting.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's the power of perspective. And I feel like all of these things, if you're aware that,
Mm.
hitting that $1 million ARR goal or getting your
Yeah.
MBA or whatever the goal is, like you imagine how that feels. And then, once you have it, that feeling is gone. Um,
Yeah.
but I did
Yeah.
want to ask you, so we're trying to really learn about how folks find focus. And something that you talked about in your post was this idea of finding solitude and disconnecting. So can you talk a
Mm.
little bit about like what are you disconnecting from, and how has that practice, how you actually do that, maybe day to day, and how that helps you?
Yeah. So this was advice from another wise friend of mine, and as I was trying to detach my identity from my work, as I was trying to figure out what I should do next, as I was trying to think through all of those kinds of things, um, he recommended solitude as a practice. And so solitude doesn't mean um, sit with a book. It doesn't mean go with a journal. This definition of solitude is literally, and you can do this at home, like sit in a chair, like a comfortable chair or whatever. I would sometimes do that. And then sometimes I would go away somewhere. There's a place called Home Away that has these cabins that are like an hour and a half away from
Mm.
my house that, but the point
I'm
is
gonna
to do
write that
nothing.
down.
No, it's really
Hmm.
cool. It's neat. But the point is to do nothing. And so I just literally, you just sit there and, or you could like, maybe you go for a walk or something, but like, you're not walking around people. You're not walking as a mechanism to accomplish something or to hit a steps goal. Like the idea, and it's rooted, I think, in some like spiritual traditions, but the idea is to like learn that you just exist and that that is okay. And that the world gets along just fine
Ooh,
without you. Yeah.
spicy. Can you
Because
say
like
that
I
again?
didn't,
I feel like I need to hear it.
you exist. Like the,
And that's
yeah,
okay.
it's okay. Like I am, and part of this was I had a lot of kind of epiphanies going through this process. So like one of them was this whole like make a dent in the universe narrative that I think originated probably from startup land. And I think it might even be like venture, like the power law. Like I'm going to make 20
Hmm.
investments, 19 of them are going to fail. The one that succeeds needs to make a dent in the universe as defined by some massive exit.
Hmm.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but like it is a narrative that I think is relevant or that serves a very, very tiny proportion of the population. But I drank it like Kool-Aid. And I think I was obsessed with being, like I said, like important, young and important, make
Hmm.
impact, legacy, all of these kinds of things. And at some point in that process, like I learned like um employee number 50 at the startup doesn't get to feel that way. Every failed founder doesn't get to feel that way. Um, we have a cleaning service that comes and does our, like those people don't get to feel that way. The person that walks my dog doesn't get to feel that way. My mom doesn't get to feel that way. Anybody who's retired and is no longer productive as defined by
Hmm.
building something doesn't get to
Hmm.
feel that way.
Yeah.
It just it's a I think it's a bad narrative for most people. And so like I needed something that was bigger and more redeeming than that. And solitude was really helpful for me. And like, um, you are not like, just like you are not your job. You are not,
Hmm.
how your kids turn out. You are not,
Hmm.
you like when I'm just sitting there, like, who am I? And so it was, um, really, really useful at kind of quieting all of the messages that I just sort of passively allow myself to get bombarded with at all times, from Twitter, from
Oh God.
Slack, from the neighborhood in which I live, from all those kinds of things. And so it wasn't something I did like inherently to improve my focus per se. It was to disconnect myself from, like I said, just like all of these competing shouting narratives and just sort of get more in touch with like, who am I? And like, what do I care about? And what do I not care about? And that part of like, when I said I arrived at a services business, like, I don't think I would have gotten there if I hadn't done
Hmm.
this, because I think my default would have been, I have to build a startup or I have to do like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
For all the reasons that we've talked about.
Yeah. Do
I
you
wouldn't have gotten
like go in? Did you go in with like a list of questions and sort of meditate on the questions, or just you just sit and let your mind do whatever it does?
there. I kind of just let my
Clearly,
mind do
clearly,
whatever.
I have no solitude practice, so.
No, I mean, I might, to be candid, like my friend told me to do this for years. And
Okay.
I think he saw something in my soul or my heart or something like that when we would
Hmm.
catch up over a drink or whatever and talk about work or talk about our life. I think he perceived something before I saw it,
Mm.
and it took kind of being, I didn't have anything, I didn't have an excuse anymore. Like I don't have anything going on. Like sure, I'll go do I'll go do that. Um, but yeah, I think it's allowed me, I think when I re-enter the world, I think I'm more present with people. I think it actually makes me better able to connect with people in a way. I'm more present with people. I think I'm more like, there will be a part of me, I think, that has that ego piece that will
Hmm.
struggle with identity maybe forever. But
Yeah.
I am more comfortable talking about my new thing, for example, and not feeling sheepish about it. I am more
Hmm.
comfortable just being who I am. And a lot of people, I think, use like the don't care about what people think as sort of an excuse to be a prick, honestly. So when I say don't care about what people think, it's not um, an excuse to be mean. In fact, I want to be more kind and more generous and more loving with my time and more
Hmm.
invested in people. But it's not allowing um, their opinion to drive my self worth, if that makes any sense.
Totally.
Um, so
So, you have sort of this extreme of the solitude where there's like nothing in your
mhm.
distracting you. But then there's like the day-to-day reality of the kids and the activities and the work and the slack. How do you balance those extremes? Are there any practices that you've developed in your day-to-day that help you sort of
Yeah,
like it's almost like when you get a massage and you
mhm.
walk away and you feel really relaxed, and then
Yeah,
you get in the car and someone calls you and there's some emergency and you're like, oh, that's it. All the benefits
yeah,
of the massage are totally gone, or whatever it is,
yeah,
or yoga. So how do you think about that?
yeah. So a bunch of things. Like I'm a tinkerer, and so like I do a lot of things, and I've tried a lot of things. Some things that have helped me. So first of all, I realized that this mattered to me. So I've had a statement of values for a very long time, and I always had they were the same for many years. Last year, I added a new one, which was ruthlessly eliminate hurry. and and I define
Wow.
hurriness and busyness differently. Busy, I can have a busy schedule without being hurried. I think hurried is a condition of my soul and like how I feel. And there are things that make it, I have observed, that make me more hurried. And so, um, lots of things, basic physiological stuff like drinking water, helpful. If I overdo it on caffeine, I feel more hurried. Um, I had to I realized when I stepped away that there were certain things that triggered feelings of kind of anxiety. Like my heart, we have a Papa shot in our basement that my son was given for a birthday present one year. And
It's like the
I,
basketball thing.
yeah,
Okay.
there was a long period of, and I haven't tried it in a while, but I realized at one point after I had already stepped away from the firm, if I go downstairs and I shoot Papa shot, my heart races. And I realized that like often when I would have a stressful conversation or something like that, either during the call
Hmm.
or after the call, I'd go downstairs and shoot Papa shot as a way to like decompress or whatever. But my body associated it with that. It also did it with cooking. I don't
Oh,
have a choice
wow.
to cook. I have to cook.
Hmm.
Like, and I and so I've learned to try to rewire my brain to not associate that. But I don't shoot the Papa shot right now. Like so like getting away from things that trigger it, I think was one of
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
And then there's just like how I order my day. So like I set my default like calendar settings, like the 25-minute, 50-minute meeting versus
Okay.
like give
Back
myself
to
five
back.
minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, even just to like, obviously like get up, use the restroom, grab something to drink or whatever it is. But like I also like it's helped me like I said, around connecting. Like I've done
Hmm.
I'll take like 30 seconds right before a call and I'll breathe and I'll think about the person that I'm getting on the call with. And it's like, how can I try to serve this person in this call? And that's my only objective. And I'm not going to care about the outcome. So like in a sales call, like I'm doing this right now with sales calls. I have a couple this afternoon. I am trying to really, I can't control whether or not they buy the thing at the end of the day. So I'm releasing myself from the outcome. I'm going to do the things that one needs to do to be a good salesperson, and to the degree that I can be better at it, I want to learn that.
Mhm.
but my goal isn't to get the sale. My goal is to help them figure out whether they need this or not. And they might not.
Mhm.
And so I don't
Yeah.
want them to work with me if they don't need it. And so it's just like, and then so like, what's the equivalent version for any other kind of meeting or whatever? So like, I would never have done that before because it was like 30-minute into 30-minute into 30-minute. And it just is like giving myself that little bit of extra margin. Um, I have called, uh, the mentor that told me about solitude talked about disciplines. It's like a subset of disciplines. And he defined a discipline as anything that allows me to do what I can't do by direct effort. And so, and that allows for a wide latitude of things. One of the things that I started doing, and I'm not doing a lot of it right now, but when I realized that I wanted to I wanted to eliminate hurry, I
Mhm.
would, when I would go grocery shopping, I would find the longest line and I would go in the longest line on purpose.
Oh
When
my
I would,
goodness.
yeah, like just because like previous version of me would play this like mental calculation,
Yes.
and I'd be looking at it and I'd be
Yeah.
like, I got to make the line for that one or whatever. And it was sort of like this game of constant like optimization. And
Yes.
I
That
would
sounds
try to
very
drive this.
familiar.
Yeah, I would try to drive the speed limit, which drove me nuts. But like it just like, so it was like, how can I? But I know I like I will notice the pace at which I walk. I will notice the pace at which I am chopping vegetables to make dinner. Like
Mhm.
let's slow down just a hair and just
Oh
like
my
so.
gosh.
Um, Things like that I think have been very helpful. And then there's stuff like there's like non-sleep deep rest protocol, which is like a way of like it's like similar-ish to meditation, but it's like I
Okay.
found a 10-minute Huberman did it. It's like a 10-minute
Oh,
video. So like in the
okay.
middle of the day, I'll lay down for 10 minutes and I'll listen to this, and that's like been recharging. My phone is in do not disturb all day long. So like my wife and
Okay.
my kids can get through, but nobody else
Okay.
can.
Okay.
Um,
No push
I check
notifications, I'm guessing.
I
Okay.
check my phone enough, like anyway. Like I still get back to people
Yeah.
pretty quickly. I check my phone way more than I would
Mhm.
like. I use a tool called Opal that blocks social because I found part of like my job is content creation. There is a
Yeah.
very direct correlation between posting and
Mhm.
checking. Like, do
Yes.
I matter? Give me
Oh,
my validation.
yeah.
Um, um, Opal turns all that off. Um, and then like we've started doing things like we bought a charger that we leave in our on the main level of our house, and then we put our phone when we put our kids to bed, we put our phones down there.
Yeah.
And so it charges not in the room. So then I read a book and stuff like that. So like,
And you have to buy like an alarm clock, or your
right.
children wake you up or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We have an alarm. We both have alarm clocks now. Yeah. It's like, yeah. So I did a bunch of stuff. But I think the biggest one was just the, like writing that statement of intent down in the form
Hmm.
of values, was really grounding. Cause then it was sort of like, cause I review that as part of my weekly review. I review my 10-year goals. I review my like life vision or whatever. I review my statement of values. Um, Again, not to evaluate them, but just to give me, to ground me and to remind me of like why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so um,
How frequently did you say you did that?
I do that during my weekly review. And
Weekly
my
review.
approach
Okay.
to values is a little bit, so like I name the value, but then I
Hmm.
also write down, these are the things that I like. Values ultimately evidence themselves in action. So like if I don't do things that evidence that value, I have to ask myself, do I actually have that value? And sometimes the answer is yes, I do have that value. I need to get my shit together. Sometimes it's I I think I want to have this value, but I don't. And so then you change it. But so what I did is for each one, I write down, these are some behaviors that I do, and these are
Hmm.
some things that I don't do
Hmm.
to support that value that I say is so important to me. And then it's a gentle kind of course correction around like, all right, last week. And again, this comes from like spiritual traditions too, is like the idea of like the examine is like, all right, how did I do this week? You know,
Hmm.
when my daughter came in and wanted to talk to me about that drawing, I was in the middle of doing something on my phone and I didn't respond the way that I should have. And so it's like,
Yeah.
put the phone down when they come in, even if I feel annoyed or whatever it is, put the phone down and just give them my undivided attention. So like that's one I've had to like gently correct myself on more often than I'd like to admit. But yeah, I don't know. that was kind of
What's
a
the
very,
you mentioned this weekly review. Can you talk about how what that practice is and how it helps you prioritize what you need to be spending your time on for work?
yeah. So I've realized I've like become mildly to moderately OCD over the years. I've layered on these like practices. So that came from, all right, I have a 10-year vision. 10 year, I learned that I can get a lot done over a 10-year period of time. And so it allows me to cast bigger visions for myself that are also more sustainable than, and
Hmm.
it gets me out of like setting a New Year's resolution that isn't tied to anything. It's like a story I'm creating with my life. I then translate that into like 1 year objectives. And then it was like, all
Hmm.
right, if I'm going to accomplish these 1 year objectives, I should set some quarter. It's like, it's just like what we do in business, and it
Hmm.
makes total sense. And it turns out that when you set annual goals for your company that are in
Hmm.
alignment with like the vision of the business when it's done, and then you translate
Hmm.
those into quarterly OKRs, and then you translate that into how you like approach your week, you're more likely to get those things done. So it's like, why not
Yeah.
do the same thing in my personal life, basically? And so I have quarterly goals, and then as part of my weekly review, which came from getting things done
Hmm.
originally,
Hmm.
I allow myself to move up in like horizons of
Hmm.
focus, to use his language. So, but I do clear my inboxes. I review my project lists. I read my life vision, my 10-year vision, my 1 year objectives, my quarterly objectives, my statement of values, not to evaluate them, but just to like, again, ground myself and remind myself of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Ask
Hmm.
myself what I need to do or what I need to do to this week to move forward on my quarterly objectives. I've started doing this thing that I call most vital tasks. So every day, every work day,
Hmm.
Monday through Friday, I identify what the most important thing is I should be doing on
Hmm.
any given day. I
Hmm.
allocate like 9 to 11 basically to just do that. And then I kind of feel like if the whole rest of the day goes to hell, like it's still a win, you know? And
Yeah.
so,
And you
so
block that
I
on your
usually,
calendar?
mhm,
Okay.
yeah. And so, and obviously like things come. So it's like, I have a potential large client that wants to like, and that's the only time they can meet. Like I'm going to meet with the
Yeah,
client.
of
You
course.
could argue that's the most important task, So, um, yeah, so that I review that, and then I do it. We do. There's a part of it that I do with my wife. So like I think she's becoming progressively more uh, crazy like me in this regard too. But we come together as a group. We look at our weekly account.
Self-aware, focused.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So
think
we
these
have a
are all
weekly
positive
meeting.
things, right?
That's right. That's right. We look at our week ahead.
Hmm.
Things like travel, things like meals, things like kids' activities, things like that. Um, Sometimes we review like budget stuff,
Hmm.
travel stuff, and then this other thing is sort of I had this idea of like I'm trying to all of this is in service of trying to create like an interesting and exciting story with my life, and it's less about like impact, like it's not um, how important was I, but it's just more about like, is this a life well lived, and great stories have great scenes in them, and so periodically we talk about like, are there any cool scenes we could create in the next month or in the next week or whatever it is. And that could be like something cool with our kids. It could be having friends over for dinner and how do we like make that special or whatever. Um, but and it rarely unfolds the way that you think. I mean, like people are people and they're not, it's not like code, but I
Hmm.
have found that if I create the conditions to make a memorable scene, it's much more likely that I'll have a memorable scene than just by
Yeah.
like hoping for it to happen by chance. And so,
Hmm.
so yeah, so those are some aspects of the weekly review. I try not to do. I've experimented with time blocking over the years. I try not to get too
Hmm.
prescriptive about that because
Right.
I have found I lose trust in my calendar if I do that, and so I block my
Right.
most vital task. But then the rest of the time is just whatever is on my, what else can I tackle with this 30-minute block or whatever in between meetings or whatever it is. So
Are you checking some sort of a to-do list for that, or is it in your head?
no, I use things. I'm a big GTD guy, so like I became this way. I used to be I was a creative director at a startup in New York, and we got acquired, and I was really young, and I thought I was kind of hot shit. And then they bought us, and I met my new boss, and he was like, dude, the things that you were not allowed to do any of the things that you were doing before. And like, you were going to fail in this job if you don't get your act together. And so like, I thought I was like Moses with like the stone tablets, and everybody would be like, oh, this is amazing. And then I could just be sort of a disorganized mess. I had to learn how to become organized. And so he put the fear of God in me. And then on my flight home, I was at the bookstore at the airport, and I saw Getting Things Done, and I devoured it. And it's very daunting the first time you read it. It's
Yeah,
very
it's a lot.
prescriptive. But I started implementing pieces of it, and like little by little, like I became that person that he sort of talks about. So my inbox is almost always not at zero, because the second you get it to zero, something new comes in. But my inbox gets processed. I have all my open loops captured. Blah 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 blah. So, but
Got it. Okay, one last question. So you mentioned Getting Things Done. Are there any other books, influencers, podcasts that you would recommend that sort of influence how you think and you're checking on regularly?
That's a really good question. It's evolved. I mean, I used to read business books all the time. I think partially by virtue of like stepping away a little bit. And I also think like, I don't think I'm unique in this. I think a lot of people are kind of, I think COVID probably precipitated a lot of this. People are kind of reevaluating how they think about work
Everything.
and where it fits into their life and things like that.
Yeah.
There was a book called 4,000 Weeks that came out a year or two ago that I thought was very good about this. It's this tension of like, I do want to be productive. And so like, I'm not going to get rid of my approach to time management, my approach to task management, or things like that. But he does talk about it kind of in an existential way, and reframe some of that. Like we are more than our productive capacity, I guess. And there is a certain sense of like, it's like both and these things. Like, I feel like all of these big things are like tensions to manage more than they are like problems to solve. And so it's like, yes, I want to be productive. Yes, I want to build a company that I'm proud of, etc. Also, I don't care about the outcome. And I realize it's a sandcastle, and it's going to get knocked down, and nobody will remember it. And that's okay. And like, sandcastles are fun, and it's more fun when you build sandcastles with people you like, and let's make the best sandcastle we can make. But it's a sandcastle, and like, just let's name it for what it is. And so that book was really helpful for me. There's a guy, so like that mentor of mine turned me onto this guy, Dallas Willard, who died in 2013, but he was a philosophy professor at USC who also wrote like religious books. So he's this very, I don't even know how to describe him. He just strikes me as a person that kind of is like lives in another time zone, if that makes sense. Like he seems to move through his life in a way, or did. I mean, he's no longer around. But the people that talk about him just talk about him like something was different about this guy. And so I've read all of his books. I listened to like videos of him to put myself to sleep at night. He sounds like Bob Ross kind of. So it's like, and he meanders, and it's like, he's not the most gifted public speaker, but he helps me fall asleep. But he's just he's a really fascinating guy. Like there was a speaking event he was at, and someone like asked him a question or like made a comment that was very offensive and wrong. And the person who was like following him around to do this like write up on him knew that. And at the end of it, he said, I think this is just a good place to stop. And the interviewer went up to him afterward and was like, why didn't you put that person in their place? Like I knew they were wrong. And he said, I'm practicing the discipline of not having to have the last word.
Oh, that's good.
I don't
That's
know.
really
Like,
good.
I just like, he just strikes me as somebody who's wired very differently than everybody else. And so, and I find it very attractive. So
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Sean, I want to be respectful of your time.
yeah.
This has been so great and insightful. Thank you so much for the time. Where can folks find you on the internet?
Yeah. LinkedIn, just Sean Johnson, intentionally on Twitter. new company's called Madison. Website's hiremadison.com. We grow professional services firms. But yeah, like email sean.johnson@gmail. I like riffing with people. If anything that we talked about, if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them or hop on a quick, on a 25-minute call with people.
Awesome.
The
Thank
process.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.